Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue with the story of Rostam and Esfandyar. Dawn touched the mountain tops and dispersed the darkness of the night. Rostam put on his armor, prayed to the world's creator, and was eager for combat, made his way toward the Persian army. As he rode out, he called, "Brave Lionheart, how long will you sleep?" Rostam had saddled rash. "Rise from your sweet sleep and face Rostam's vengeance." When Esfandyar heard his voice, all worldly weapons seemed useless to him. He said to Persuade, "A lion cannot fight a magician. I didn't think that Rostam would be able even to drag his armor and helmet back to his palace. And now he comes here riding Raksh, whose body yesterday was a mass of wounds. I have heard that Zal is a magician, that he stretches out his hands towards the sun, and that in his manic fury he surpasses all other magicians. It would be unwise for me to face his son." But Shutin said, "Why are you so hesitant today? Didn't you sleep through the night? What is it between you and Rostam that you must both suffer so much in this business? I think your luck is abandoning you. All it does is lead you from one war to another." Esfandyar dressed himself in his armor and went out to Rostam. When he saw his face, he cried out, "May your name disappear from the surface of the earth! Aren't you the man who fled from me yesterday, shorn of heart, soul, courage, life itself? Have you forgotten, then, that you Sistani wretch, the power of my bow? It's only through the magic you've practiced that you're able to stand before me again. Zal's magic cured you. Otherwise, you'd be food for the wildcats by now. But this time, I shall fill you so full of arrows that all Zal's magic will be useless. I shall so batter your body that Zal will never see you alive again." Rostam replied, "Will you never tire of combat? I have not come to fight against you today. I have come humbly offering an honorable reconciliation. Fear God, and do not drive wisdom from your heart. Constantly you try to treat me unjustly, blinding yourself to wisdom's ways. By God himself, by Zoroaster and the pure faith, by the sacred fire and the divine fire, by the sun and the moon and the Zend Avesta, I swear to you that the road you are following is one of harm and evil. Forget the harsh words that have passed between us. I shall open to you my ancient treasuries, filled with marvels I have gathered over many years. I shall load my own horses with wealth, and you can give them to your treasurer to drive before you. I shall ride with you, and if you so command me, I shall come into the king's presence. And if the king then kills me or enslaves me, I accept this as my due. Remember what an old sage said once, never seek to have shame as your companion. I am doing everything in my power to make you give up your thirst for combat." Esfandyar said, "I'm not a fraud who looks one day for battle and the next day sulks in fear. Why do you talk so much about your wealth and possessions, washing your face with the waters of friendship? If you want to stay alive, submit your body to my chains." Once more, Rostam spoke. "Forget this injustice, Prince. Don't sully my name and make your own soul contemptible. Only evil will come of this struggle. I shall give you 1,000 royal gems, along with torques and pearls and earrings. I shall give you 1,000 sweet-lipped boys to serve you day and night, and 1,000 girls, all from Kalaoki, whose women are famous for their charm, to make your court splendid with their beauty. My lord, I shall open the treasuries of Sam and Zal before you and give you all they contain. I shall bring men from Kabbalistan for you, fit companions for your feasting and fearless in war. And then I shall go before you like a servant, accompanying you to your vengeful king's court. But you, my prince, should drive vengeance from your heart, and keep devils from dwelling in your body. You are a king, one who fears God, and you have other ways of binding men to you than by chains. Your chains will disgrace my name forever. How can such an evil be worthy of you?" Esfandyar replied, How long will you tell me to turn away from God and from my king? To disobey my sovereign Lord and King is to rebel against God's justice and to merit hell. Accept my chains or enmity and war, but bandy pointless words with me no more." When Rostam saw that his offer of friendship had no effect on Esfandyar, he notched the wine-soaked tamarisk arrow to his bow and lifted his eyes to heaven, saying, "Just Lord, who gives us knowledge, strength, and life, you know how I have sought to end this strife. Creator of the moon and Mercury, you see my weakness and humility and his unjust demands. I pray that you see nothing sinful in what I must do." Rostam hung back for a moment, and Esfandyar taunted him. "Well, famous Rostam, it seems your soul's grown tired of combat. Now that you're faced with the arrows of Goshtasp, the lion heart and spear points of Lorasp." Then, as the Simorg had ordered him, Rostam drew back his bow. Aiming at Esfandyar's eyes, he released the arrow, and the Persian prince, the world was turned to darkness. The tall cypress swayed and bent. Knowledge and glory fled from him. The God-fearing prince bowed his head and slumped forward, and his Chinese bow slipped from his hands. He grasped at his black horse's mane as his blood soaked into the earth beneath him. Rostam addressed Esfandyar. "Your harshness has borne fruit. You were the man who said, 'I am invincible. I can bow the heavens down toward the earth.' Yesterday I was wounded by 8 arrows and bore this silently. 1 arrow has removed you from combat and left you slumped over your horse. In another moment your head will be on the ground, and your mother will mourn for you." Esfandyar lost consciousness and fell to the ground. Slowly he came to himself and grasped the arrow. When he withdrew it, its head and feathers were soaked in blood. The news immediately reached Bahman, and the royal glory was shrouded in darkness. He ran to Pashutin and said, "Our expedition here has ended in disaster. His mammoth body lies in the dirt, and the world is a dark pit to him." They ran to him and saw him lying soaked in his blood, a bloody arrow in his hand. Pashutin said, "Who of our great men can understand the ways of the world? Only God, who guides our souls in the heavens and the planets in their courses, knows its truth. One like Esfandyar, who fought for pure faith, who cleared the world of the evil of idol worship and never stretched out his hand to evil deeds, dies in the prime of his youth, and his royal head lies in the dirt, while one who spreads strife in the world, who torments the souls of free men, lives for many years unharmed by fate." The young men cradled the fallen hero's body, wiping away the blood, with sorrow in his heart, his face smeared with blood. Pashutin lamented over him. "O Esfandyar, prince and world conqueror, who has toppled this mountain, who has trampled underfoot this raging lion, who has torn out the elephant's tusk, who has held back the torrent of the Nile, where have your heart and soul and courage fled, and your strength and fortune and faith? Where now are your weapons of war? Where now is your sweet voice at our banquets? You cleansed the world of malevolence. You were fearless before lions and demons, and all your reward to us is to reign in the earth. My curses on the crown and throne, may they and your faithless father, King Goshtasp, be forgotten forever." Esfandyar said, "Do not torment yourself for me. This came to me from the crown and court. The killed body goes into the earth, and you should not distress yourself at my death. Where now are Feridun, Hushang, and Jamshed? They came on the wind, and were gone with a breath. My noble ancestors too departed, and ceded their place to me. No one remains in this fleeting world. I have traveled the earth, and know its wonders, both those that are clear and those that are hidden, trying to establish the ways of God, taking wisdom as my guide. And now that my words have gone forth, and the hands of Ahriman are tied, fate stretches out its lying claws for me. My hope is that I shall reap the reward of my efforts in paradise. Zal's son did not kill me by my chivalrous means. Look at this tamarisk wood grasped in my fist. It was this wood that ended my days, directed by the Simorg, and by that wily cheat Rostam. Zal, who knows all the world's sorceries, cast this spell. Hearing his words, Rostam turned aside, his heart wrung with anguish. He said, "Some evil demon has brought this suffering to you." It is as he said. He acted honorably. Since I have been a warrior in the world, I have seen no armed horseman like Esfandyar, and because of myself I was helpless against the bow and strength. I sought for help rather than yield to him. It was his death I notched to my bow and release, since his time had come. If fate had meant him to live, how could I have found the tamarisk? Man must leave this dark earth, and cannot prolong his life by so much as a breath beyond his appointed time. I was the means by which the tamarisk arrow struck him down. Esfandyar said, "Now my life draws to an end. Come closer. Don't leave me. My thoughts are different now than from what they were. Listen to my advice when I ask of you concerning my son, who is the center of my life. Take him under your wing. Show him the path to greatness." Hearing his words, Rostam came weeping to his side, lamenting loudly with tears of shame flowing from his eyes. News reached the palace. Zal came like the wind, and Zavaray and Faramoth approached, bewildered with sorrow. Zal addressed Rostam, "My son, I weep heart's blood for you, because I have found from our priests and astrologers that whoever spills Esfandyar's blood will be harried by fate. His life in this world will be harsh, and when he dies, he will inherit torment." Esfandyar spoke to Rostam. "All that has happened as fate willed. Not you, your arrow, or the Simorg killed me here. Goshtaps, my father's enmity, made you be the means by which to murder me. He ordered me to sack Sistan, to turn it to a wilderness, to slay and burn, to suffer war's travails, while he alone enjoyed the glory of his crown and throne. I ask you to accept my son, to raise him in Sistan, to teach him manhood's ways. He is a wise and willing youth. From you he'll learn the skills of war, what he must do at courtly banquets when the wine goes round, how to negotiate or stand his ground, hunting, the game of polo, everything that suits the education of a king. As for Jamasp, may his accursed name perish, and may he waste away in shame." When Rostam had heard him out, he stood and laid his hand on his chest and said, "If you die, I swear to fulfill what you have said. I shall seat him on the ivory throne and place the royal crown upon his head myself. I shall stand before him as his servant and call him my lord and king." Esfandyar answered, "You are an old man, a champion of many wars. But as God is my witness, and by the faith that guides me, all this good that you have done for the world's kings will avail you nothing. Your good name has turned to evil, and the earth is filled with mourning for my death. This deed will bring sorrow to your soul, as God willed should happen." Then he addressed Pashutin, "I expect now nothing but my shroud. When I have left this fleeting world, lead our army back to Iran, and there tell my father that I say to him, 'As you have achieved what you desire, don't look for excuses. The world has turned out entirely as you wished, and all authority is yours now. With my just sword, I spread righteousness in the world, and no one dared oppose you. And when the true faith had been established in Iran, I was ready for greatness. Before our courtiers, you praised me, and behind their backs, you sent me to my death. You have gained what you sought. Rejoice and put your anxieties to rest. Forget about death. Let your palace be filled with celebration. The throne is yours. Sorrow and a harsh fate are mine. The crown is yours. A coffin and a shroud is mine. But what have the wise said? No arrow can defeat death. Put no faith in your wealth and crown and court. I shall be watching for you, and when you come to that other place, and when you do, we shall together before the world's judge to speak before him and to hear his verdict. When you leave him, go to my mother, and tell her that death has taken her brave, ambitious son, that against death's arrow his helmet was like air, and that not even a mountain of steel could have withstood it. Tell her that she shall come soon after me, and that she should not grieve her soul for my sake, or unveil her face before the court, or look on my face in its shroud. To see me would make her weep, and no wise man would praise her grief. And bid my sisters and my wife an eternal farewell from me. Evil came to me from my father's crown. The key to her treasury was my life. Tell my womenfolk that I have sent you to the court to shame his dark soul. He paused and caught his breath and said, It was Goshtasp, my father, who destroyed me. And at that moment his pure soul left his wounded body, which lay dead in the dust. Rostam tore his clothes, and in agony of grief smeared dust upon his head. Weeping, he said, Great knight, son and grandson of a king famed throughout the world, Goshtasp brought you to an evil end. When he had wept copiously, he addressed the corpse again. To the high heavens your pure soul has flown. May your detractors reap what they have sown. Zavare said to him, You should not accept this trust. An ancient saying says that if you rear a lion cub, when it cuts its teeth and the instinct for hunting grows in it, the first person it will turn on is its keepers. Our two countries have an evil history. Evil has come to Iran with the death of Esfandyar, and Bahman will bring evil to Zabalestan. Mark my words. When he becomes king, he will seek vengeance for his father's death. Rostam replied, No one, good or evil, can deflect what the heavens will. I shall do what the wise and honorable. If he turns to evil, fate will answer him. Don't provoke disaster by your prophecies. They made an iron coffin lined with Chinese silk and wrapped him in a shroud of gold brocade. His chieftains lamented for him as his body was clothed and his turquoise crown placed upon his head. Then the coffin was closed, and the royal tree that had borne so much fruit was hidden from men's sight. The coffin was sealed with pitch and smeared with musk and sweet-smelling oils. Rostam brought 40 camels, carapons in Chinese brocade, one of which bore the coffin, while the rest formed columns to the right and left of the armies. All who were there scored their faces and plucked out their hair, calling out the princes' names as they did so. At the head of the army, Pashutin led Esfandyar's black horse, which had its mane and tail docked. The saddle on the horse's back was reversed, and Esfandyar's mace, armor, helmet, and spear hung from it. The army made its way back to Persia, but Bahman stayed weeping and mourning in Zabalestan. Rostam took him to his palace and looked after him there as if he were his own soul. News reached Goshtasp that the young prince's head had been brought low in death. The king rent his clothes and poured dust on his head and the crown. The palace resounded with the noise of lamentation, and the world was filled with Esfandyar's name. Goshtasp said, O pure of faith, our land and time will never see the like of you again. May Manyacher reigned there has been no warrior to equal you. Your sword was always at the service of our faith, and you maintained our chieftain in their glory. But the Persian nobles were angered by his words, and washed their eyes of all sympathy of this king. With one voice they said, Accursed king, to keep your throne and crown, you sent Esfandyar to his death in Zabalestan. May the Kyanid crown shame your head, and may the star of your good fortune falter in its course." When the news came to the women's quarters, his mother and sisters, together with their daughters, went out to meet the returning army. Their heads were unveiled, and they went barefoot in the dust, tearing their clothes as they walked. They saw the weeping Pashutin approach, and behind him, Esfandyar's black horse and the coffin. The women clung to Pashutin, weeping and wailing, begging him to open the coffin and let them see the slaughtered prince. Grief-stricken and hemmed in by the lamenting women who tore at their flesh and their anguish, Pashutin called to the army's blacksmiths to bring tools to open the coffin. The lid was lifted, and a new wave of lamentation broke out as his mothers and sisters saw the prince's face and his black beard anointed with musk. The women fainted, and their black curls were clotted with blood. When they revived, they turned to Esfandyar's horse, caressing its neck and back. Katayan wept to think that his horse had carried her son when he was killed, and said, "What hero can you carry off to war now? Who can you deliver to the dragon's claw?" They clung to its shorn mane and heaped dust on its head, and all the while the soldiers' lamentations rose into the sky. When Pashutin reached the king's audience hall, he neither paused at the door, nor made his obeisance, nor came forward to the throne. He shouted out, "Most arrogant men, the signs of your downfall are there for all to see. You have destroyed Iran, and yourself with this deed. Wisdom and the divine far has deserted you, and God will repay you for what you have done. The back of your power is broken, and all you will hold on to its grasp from now is the wind. For the sake of your throne, you imbued your son in blood, and may your eyes never see the throne or good fortune again. The world is filled with evil, and you will lose your throne forever. In this world, you will be despised, and in the world to come, you will be judged." Then he turned to Shahnameh and said, "And you worthless, evil counselor, who knows no speech in all the world but lies, who turns all splendor to crooked deceit, who stir up enmity between princes, setting one against another. All you know how to do is to teach men to desert virtue and cleave to evil. But as you've sown, so shall you reap. With your talk, you destroyed a great man, saying that Esfandyar's life was in the palm of Rostam's hand." Pashutin paused. Then he told the king plainly what had passed between Rostam and Bahman. When he had heard him out, the king regretted what he had done. The court was cleared, and his daughters Bey, Afared, and Homeh came before their father, their cheeks scored and their hair torn out in their sorrow for their dead brother. They said, "Great king, haven't you considered what Esfandyar's death means? He was the first to avenge Zarir's death. He led the attack against the Turks. It was he who established your kingdom. Then, on the words of some slander, you imprisoned him, and immediately our army was defeated, and our grandfather was killed. When Aras reached Balk, he struck terror into the land, and we who lived veiled from men's eyes were driven naked from the palace into the common highway. Aras extinguished the sacred fire of Zoroaster and seized the kingdom. And then you saw what your son did? He utterly destroyed our enemies and brought us back safely from the brass fortress where we had been imprisoned. He was the savior of our country and of your throne, and so you sent him to Sistan, filling him with specious talk so that he'd give up his life for the sake of your crown? And the world would lament his death? Neither the Simorg nor Rostam nor Zal killed him. You killed him, and as you killed him, you have no right to weep and complain. Shame on your white beard that you killed your son for the sake of greed. Before you there has been many kings worthy of the throne. None killed his own son or turned against his own family. The king turned to Pashutin and said, Bestir yourself and pour water on these children's fiery rage. Pashutin led the women from the court, saying to Esfandyar's mother, Katayan, how long will you rage and grieve like this? He sleeps happily, and his right soul rests from the strife and sorrow of this world. Why should you grieve for him, since he is now in heaven? Katayan took his wise advice and accepted God's justice. For a year in every house and in the palace there was mourning throughout the country, and for many years men wept to think of the tamarisk arrow and the simorg's trick and Zal. Meanwhile, Bahman lived in Zabalestan, hunting, drinking, taking his ease in the country's gardens. Rostam taught this vengeful youth how to ride, to drink wine, and the customs of a royal court. He treated him more warmly than he had been his own son, and rejoiced in his company day and night. When he had fulfilled his promise, the door of Goshtap's revenge was closed. Rostam wrote a sorrowful letter, setting out his kindness to the king's son. He began by invoking Zoroaster, and then went on, As God is my witness, and Pashutin can testify, I said many times to Esfandyar that he should lay aside all enmity and desire for war. I told him I would give him land and wealth, but he chose otherwise. Fate willed that he ignored my pleas. Who can oppose what the heavens bring about? His son Bahman has lived with me, and is more splendid in my eyes than shining Jupiter. I have taught him how to be a king, instructing him in the elements of wisdom. If the king will promise to forget the tamarisk arrow and accept my repentance, all I have is at his disposal. My body, soul, wealth, crown, my very flesh and bones are his. When the letter arrived at Goshtap's court, his courtiers soon learned of it. Pashutin came and confirmed everything Rostam had said. He recalled Rostam's grief at having to face Esfandyar, and the way that he had counseled him. He spoke, too, of Rostam's wealth, and of the land he ruled over. Pashutin's remarks pleased the king and had a good effect. The king's heart warmed towards Rostam, and he put aside his sorrow. Immediately he wrote a magnanimous answer to Rostam's letter. When the heavens will someone an injury, who has the wisdom to prevent this? Pashutin has told me of what you tried to do, and his heart was filled my heart with kindness towards you. Who can understand the heavens turning? A wise man does not linger on the past. You are as you have always been, and more than this, you are the lord of Hend and Kunaj, and whatever more you desire, be it a throne or authority or arms, ask it only from me. As his master had ordered him, Rostam's messenger quickly took back the king's answer. Time passed, and Prince Bahman grew to be a man. He was wise, knowledgeable, authoritative, every inch a king. Jamas, with his understanding of good and evil, knew that the kingdom would one day be Bahman's, and he said to Goshtap, My lord, you should consider Bahman's situation. He is mature in knowledge and an honorable man. And he's lived in a foreign land for way too long, and no one has ever read him a letter from you. A letter should be written to him, something as splendid as a tree in paradise. Who have you but Bahman to cleanse the sorrow of Esfandyar's fate from your mind? Goshtap was pleased by his suggestion and answered, Write him a letter, and write one also to Rostam, saying, God be thanked, great champion, that I am blessed and pleased with you, and my mind is at rest. My grandson Bahman, who is dearer to me than my own soul, and is wiser, my counselor Jamas, has learned all kingly skills from you. Now you should send him back to me. To Bahman he wrote, As soon as you read this letter, stay in Zabul no longer. I have a great desire to see you. Put your affairs in order, and come as quickly as you can. When the letter was read to him, Rostam was pleased, and he prepared a parting gift for Bahman. He opened his treasury and brought out armor, shining daggers, barding for horses, bows, arrows, maces, Indian swords, camphor, musk, sandalwood, jewels, gold, silver, horses, uncut cloth, servants and young boys, gold belts and saddles, and 2 goblets filled with rubies. All this he handed over to Bahman. Rostam came 2 stages of the road with the prince, and then sent him on his way to the king. When Goshtop saw his grandson's face, tears covered his cheeks, and he said, "You are another Esfandyar. You resemble no one but him." Bahman was intelligent and quick-witted, and from the on he was called Ardashir. He was strong, fine warrior, wise, knowledgeable, and God-fearing. When he stood, his fingertips came to below his knees. In all things he was like his father, whether fighting or feasting or hunting. Goshtap could not be separated from him, and made him his drinking companion. He would say, "Now, since my noble warlike son has died, may Bahman live forever at my side." Here's where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends,